Today on RoxomTV News, a landfill collapses in the Philippines, killing workers who were literally buried by the system that was supposed to protect them. Plus, a former New York City mayor launches a token that claims it will save the world, and it rug pulls in minutes. But first, reports are coming in that Iran is now preparing executions as protests continue. Let's get into it, guys. Roll the stinger. Happy Tuesday and welcome back to another edition of RoxomTV News. I'm Hank Hudson. So this morning, Iran is now facing what human rights organizations are calling its most lethal wave of unrest in years, as nationwide protests are being met with an increasingly violent and uncompromising response from the country's security forces. Now, what began as demonstrations over economic hardship, soaring prices, and the rising cost of living has rapidly spread across major cities and provincial towns, transforming into a broader uprising that now touches nearly every corner of the country. Eyewitnesses interviewed by international media describe scenes that are difficult to verify independently, but deeply consistent in their accounts. Live ammunition being fired into crowds, bodies being removed directly from the streets, and families desperately searching hospitals for missing relatives. At the same time, the government has sharply restricted internet access, cutting off platforms, slowing connections, and making it increasingly difficult for information to move in and out of the country. Alongside these digital blackouts, authorities have deployed elite security units into restive areas, signaling that they are not preparing for negotiations or concessions, but rather for a sustained campaign to crush the unrest outright. A senior Iranian official told Reuters that roughly 2,000 people have been killed since the protests began, a figure that would place this crackdown far beyond previous unrest in both speed and lethality. Now, the number is significantly higher than estimates from international human rights groups, which already place the death toll in the hundreds. BBC reporting, based on interviews with eyewitnesses, medical workers, and hospital staff, paints a grim picture of a healthcare system under extreme strain, with overwhelmed emergency rooms, reports of mass burials, and bodies being withheld from families. Let's take a look at some of that reporting.
Anti-government demonstrations have been raging for weeks across Iran, with thousands of people taking to the streets. The government has imposed an internet blackout, but we've already seen evidence of the government's violent crackdown. The US-based human rights group Harana says nearly 500 protesters have been killed since protests began, with other activists saying the true figure could be much higher. Several videos believed to have been filmed on Friday have emerged, showing rows and rows of dead bodies in a mortuary in Tehran. We've blurred these videos because many of the body bags are open. We've counted at least 180 bodies from just one mortuary. What appear to be friends and family members walk through the bodies to identify their loved ones. We know this is the mortuary because identifiable features which have been matched to publicly available images. Verified footage like this shows thousands of people out on the streets of major cities and towns across the country, shouting "Death to the dictator" and calling for the downfall of the regime. Videos of security forces opening fire towards crowds of protesters have been circulating online. BBC Verify and BBC Persian have analysed more than 200 videos of anti-government demonstrations in more than 67 towns and cities across the country. We've only mapped protests with verified video. The true picture is likely to emerge when the internet blackout has been lifted.
Now, Iranian authorities strongly dispute these casualty figures, accusing foreign media of exaggeration and misinformation, but they have not released transparent, independently verifiable data of their own. What is no longer in doubt, however, is that the state's response has entered a new and more severe phase. This is no longer only about mass arrests or street-level violence. The government is now preparing to use the death penalty as an explicit tool of deterrence. State media and human rights organizations say that at least one execution is scheduled for tomorrow. Efran Soltani, a 26-year-old protester, is set to be hanged on charges of waging war against God, a phrase that carries deep religious and legal weight inside Iran's system, and one that allows for the harshest possible punishment. Rights groups warn that these trials have been rushed, conducted with little transparency, and stripped of meaningful due process. This tactic, though, it's not new. In past waves of unrest, Iranian authorities have used executions as a way to send a message that protest is not merely dangerous, but fatal. The logic is stark. If protests feel risky, people might still come. If protests feel irreversible, many will retreat. And yet, despite this escalation, the unrest continues. Videos verified by the BBC show protesters chanting against Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, tearing down posters, and in some areas, toppling statues associated with Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, witnesses say demonstrations are becoming more spontaneous and more decentralized, with smaller groups forming and dissolving rapidly, making them harder to monitor and suppress even as security patrols intensify. Iran's leadership insists it remains firmly in control. Officials continue to blame what they describe as foreign enemies for fomenting unrest, while state media claims order is being restored. Now, in some cities, pro-government rallies have been organized, projecting an image of stability and unity. The Iranian president has promised action against price gouging and inflation, but analysts cited by Reuters say economic fixes alone are unlikely to resolve what has become a much deeper crisis. This is no longer just about food prices or wages. It's about political repression, corruption, and a growing belief among many Iranians that the system is incapable of reforming itself. Now, as the violence has escalated, so has the international pressure. The United States has said it is prepared to respond militarily if the crackdown intensifies further. Iran, in turn, has threatened retaliation. What began as a domestic uprising is now increasingly entangled with global geopolitics, which brings us to the first key question here. If the protests are this widespread and the crackdown is this brutal, why does the system still appear to be holding? Now, despite the scale of the unrest and the brutality of the response, analysts say there are still no visible cracks at the top of Iran's power structure. Now, that may seem counterintuitive, but Iran's clerical establishment is anchored by one of the most entrenched security states in the world. At its core is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, alongside the Basij Parliamentary Force. Now, together, they number close to 1 million personnel and remain loyal to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, according to diplomats, regional officials, and analysts interviewed by Reuters, protests alone are rarely enough to topple a regime. What actually causes systems to collapse is not anger, it is defection. Now, Vali Nasir, one of the world's most prominent Iranian experts, said that for a collapse to occur, unrest would need to persist much longer and fracture the state itself, especially the armed forces. So far, that has not happened. The security services appear unified even as public legitimacy erodes, and beyond force, the regime also has structural advantages. You see, Iran is a country of roughly 90 million people. It is geographically vast. Its protest centers are fragmented, and it still has a sizable population that depends on the state for jobs, subsidies, or ideological belonging. Now, this makes nationwide coordination extremely difficult and allows authorities to isolate and suppress unrest city by city. Survival, however, does not mean stability. You see, Iran's leadership is now facing its gravest crisis since the 1979 revolution. Sanctions continue to choke the economy, inflation remains high, the rial is at record lows, and Tehran's regional proxy network has been weakened by losses in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. Now, the violent crackdown may preserve control in the short term, but it has hollowed out what remained of the system's legitimacy. Analysts describe this as a dangerous equilibrium, a regime strong enough to repress, but increasingly brittle. Now, Iran has not reached a moment of collapse, but it is now operating in a state of permanent vulnerability, where future shocks could carry far greater consequence than in the past. And apart from military threats, President Trump has also floated the idea of imposing a 25% tariff on any country that does business with Iran, which, according to the BBC, would include more than 100 nations. Now, at the top of that list, of course, is China by a wide margin, followed by Iraq, the UAE, Turkey, and Russia. Now, almost all of Iran's exports are fuel-related, while its imports include food, industrial goods, and increasingly, gold. A blanket tariff threat raises major enforcement questions because Iran already relies heavily on shadow shipping fleets, non-dollar payments, and indirect trade routes that are difficult to police. On top of that, the proposal risks reopening one of the most sensitive fault lines of Trump's first term, the U.S.-China relationship, because China provides Iran with its most important economic lifeline. Beijing moves roughly 80% of Iran's exported oil, largely through small independent teapot refiners and opaque trading channels designed to skirt U.S. sanctions. Now, while China's state-owned oil giants have pulled back, analysts say total trade remains worth tens of billions of dollars annually. That makes any tariff threat both economically meaningful and politically provocative for Beijing. The tariff threat may function more as a strategic pressure than an immediately enforceable policy. Now, Trump has not specified how such a tariff would be implemented or which countries would be targeted. Similar tariff announcements in the past have sometimes been only partially enforced. Still, the signal alone has injected uncertainty into markets and diplomacy. China has already warned that it will resolutely safeguard its interests if targeted. Now, Iran's crisis is now becoming entangled with global trade, sanctions enforcement, and great power rivalries. Protests will continue, death tolls will rise, and a question will emerge for markets and policymakers. Is Washington's pressure campaign symbolic, or is it willing to escalate into a renewed trade confrontation with China? Which leads us to our next point. You see, President Trump now faces a decisive moment, not just over whether to act, but over what outcome he's actually seeking here. Though he has warned that the United States is locked and loaded to support Iranian protesters, senior analysts caution that this does not necessarily mean Washington is pursuing outright regime change. You see, according to the BBC's diplomatic analysis, Trump's objectives appear deliberately ambiguous. Experts say he may be aiming to alter the regime's behavior rather than remove it, using the threat of force as leverage. Possible goals include forcing concessions on Iran's nuclear program, halting the violent crackdowns, or extracting reforms that could eventually justify sanctions relief. All of that would ideally happen without triggering the risks associated with regime collapse. Now, inside the administration, the signals, well, they've been mixed. Trump has claimed Iran's leadership has privately reached out to negotiate, even as public rhetoric from Tehran remains defiant. White House officials insist that diplomacy remains the first option here. And the BBC reports that Vice President J.D. Vance is among senior aides urging Trump to exhaust diplomatic channels before any military escalations. Now, Trump has also referenced historical pitfalls here, including Jimmy Carter's failed 1980 hostage rescue mission, as a reminder that direct military intervention carries political as well as strategic risks. That history makes a large-scale ground operation extremely unlikely. But limited strikes, cyber operations, or covert actions remain on the table. The challenge is that every option carries the risk of escalation, and once escalation begins, control becomes very, very difficult. All right, joining us to talk about this show and others, we got the man that can connect the dots like no one else, my good friend and fellow host here at RoxomTV, Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, how are you? Happy Tuesday. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. How you been?
Thanks, Hank. I'm doing okay under the circumstances. I'm mourning Scott Adams, so it's a tough morning for many in the online content world. I think Scott was a mentor to a lot of people who do what we do in this world, talk about the news. But let's, in honor of Scott, who never missed a day, let's talk about the news. So in the Iranian situation, like you described, I think you did a great job there, Hank, breaking it all down and giving us the ins and outs. First up, it's a tough question. What's going on over in Iran? It looks like the mullahs have an appetite to keep doing this. You've got the Persian diaspora that really wants change. You've got a legitimately evil actor, but then you've also got the history of how America intercedes and involves itself in these places. You don't want Iran to turn into Libya, right? And the Libya situation is about as bad as it gets when it comes to American imperial practices. So it's not easy. And Trump, when he suggested a few days ago that help was there for the protesters. Now, we don't really know what the body count is. A lot of that could be disinformation. We're in a fog of war. I don't want to minimize how many have died. I just don't know if we know how many died. So that's definitely real. Now, what Trump did do that I think is important and noteworthy, beyond the trial ballooning of some physical help, right? World War III, as I often characterize on my show in the morning, and as many Bitcoiners see it, is a psychological and economic war. And when Trump did float that tariff question, something did happen. So whether or not the tariffs are implemented, it did actually create a currency collapse. And so overnight, although the currency was already dog shit, it's much worse now compared to what it was. It went really like Mayor Adams' New York City Jewish coin or whatever the hell it was that he launched yesterday, the
Yeah.
anti-Semitic rug pull coin that he launched.
Oh my gosh.
Their
Yeah.
currency actually died worse than that last night, worse than the Mayor Adams coin. And so the idea, first of all, of the currency collapsing does create a lot of issues going forward and does actually shake the box. So while Trump might have not sent Apaches or missiles, and probably this is no comfort to the people who died thinking they would get physical support. It does have structural implications, right? All imports now have to halt. That means fuel, food. That's all difficult. The command hierarchy really does suffer from this if they're able to pay people. Without currency, you're going to see defections probably from that command structure, right? You got to pay those guards if they're going to come to work. And then globally, we heard about China, right? China needs the oil, but not just from there. China can't have Iran destroying the Strait of Hormuz because 40% of their oil comes from the area, not just Iran. They get it from Saudi, they get it from those places. So I'm not sure how much flexibility Iran has. And that's also why you're probably not going to see Russia and China intervene to save the dead currency. It looks like they're going to have to just accept whatever ends up happening. And it definitely looks engineered. I mean, the way Trump threatened those tariffs had a certain precision aim to it. Like you said, about 100 countries involved in trade, and China being one of them. So China has existential choices to make around this, and I think Trump got them cornered. Again, probably not the best way to handle this in the sense that the mixed messages about what kind of support would be coming for the Iranians might have. We don't have a death count, fog of war. We've seen this play before, but what Trump was effective at doing was this threat, was the tariff, because of its effect on the currency. And without the currency, they've sustained levels of inflation and economic hollowing until now, but this really takes a sort of zero off of the numbers here. It's a big adjustment. They were able to ride from whatever it was over 30 years, inflation down slowly, or the currency loss and debasement down slowly. This was a step change in that. So no currency, supply chains over there are going to be in big trouble this week, which means the governance model is in big trouble, and I think they're going to lose control shortly. So I think there's still a will, though, on the part of the mullahs to do this. And so we don't know how much appetite is left for it, but this is World War III. This is what it looks like. It is psychological, it is economics, and you've seen in the past week much of the anti-American bloc, what some people call, BRICS in other terms, right? Russia, China, Venezuela, and Iran mixed in there with South Africa, who's probably not really a main player in this, and Brazil, who, probably is also a bit neutral at this point. But what you do have here is probably an inability for this anti-American axis to get any bearings about it at this point. So the economic conditions that Trump is waging this war are effective, but again, probably no solace to the hint that the protesters were going to get support. There isn't an appetite in America anyway, domestically, to see Libya too in Iran. So I don't know if Trump's going to be able to get that stuff going.
Yeah, this is the temperature really seems to be rising on this situation right now, Nolan. And for those in our audience watching at home who may not follow Iran closely, really quick, this seemingly started as a protest over prices, Iranian trash tokens, and cost of living, and has now turned into one of the deadliest crackdowns in years. So my question for you is, what typically causes that kind of escalation, where economic frustrations suddenly become a full-blown political confrontation? Because this seemed to escalate pretty quickly.
It was Axis, like you're saying. The formula until now over there was to send the money out of the country, was to send the money into real estate in particular. They don't hold their own currencies for savings, right? The trash tokens there are easy come, easy go. So what a lot of the families went ahead and did over the years was buy, condos on the waterfront. They put a lot of the money into real estate as they could. The same kinds of things you see here, but you can only do that for so long before the wages aren't enough to buy the homes. And they found themselves in that moment. So what a lot of Americans will recognize as well, right? We see what happens when things become, when the trash token really takes hold and it's not good for savings. That's what happened with American real estate many years ago, is that the savings account was really the mortgage and the value in the house. And that's how boomers really lived since the 1970s. So it's structural. What happened over there is, just like young people here feel like houses are out of their reach, it really became pronounced there. So these young people had nowhere to go. There was no, and if you realize just how hard it is for them to be able to use the internet the way we understand the internet in the West, right? You can't just, people could get Bitcoin, of course, but it's one of those cases where you probably needed some technical savvy to get your hands on it, or at least some of your peers had to be Bitcoiners over there. And Iran had a really weird take on a lot of this, which is similar to what we heard from the Venezuelans. We heard from Maurizio del Bartolomeo. I think he was on both Walker's show and my show, and he mentioned the same thing. And it's something the Persians had to live with as well. It was that when they would do IQ tests, for example, ostensibly the IQ tests were for permission to leave and go abroad because you were good enough. But actually it becomes a formula. They don't want the high IQs in Iran. They didn't want the high IQs in Venezuela because there's an adversarial relationship there. Because you'd think, your instinct is, well, why wouldn't they want to protect and keep their high IQs? No, that didn't work. So you already had the Iranian Bitcoiners out in the marketplace. The Iranian Bitcoiners are already living in condos in Dubai. They're already getting their MBA at Stanford. They're already in all of these places because this is a very high IQ place. They produce some of the best scientists, some of the best academics in the world. It's a very academically oriented culture, but they don't mind losing those people. And those are the peers, right? Bitcoin spreads by word of mouth more than anything, believe it or not. And it's a peer-to-peer network. Bitcoin spreads through word of mouth. So when you continuously lose that section of your population, when you continuously lose the early Bitcoiners, it's hard for it to catch traction in the meantime. So a lot of people saw hopelessness, right? We hear about how Bitcoin's hope. They didn't really know about it because the peers were gone. And it's not like the government's out there promoting Bitcoin. And so you get this situation where we're in an economic war and they didn't really have access to anything else. The houses are now close to them. I think, like I said, a lot of American millennials, Gen Z would recognize exactly why the Iranians were in the street. It's much worse over there. And it doesn't look like there's any off-ramp to make that better.
Yikes, between rising prices, inflation, and cost of living. I hope this isn't a harbinger of things to come down here, because like you said, a lot of millennials are probably identifying with the struggles that the Iranians are going through right now. So yikes, we better get on board and get things fixed up.
Well, luckily we have Bitcoin.
All right, we're going to move on.
Luckily we have Bitcoin.
We do have
Luckily
Bitcoin.
we have Bitcoin.
We do have Bitcoin.
And we're not going to be leaving America
just like
with... Exactly.
God bless it, right? God bless Bitcoin. All right, we're moving on to the next one here, Nolan, because Meta just hired a former Trump administration official as its new president, and this is not some random executive shuffle. This is a political power move. You see, the company announced that Dina Powell-McCormick, who served as a deputy national secretary advisor under Trump and held senior roles under President George W. Bush, will now become Meta's president and vice chair. Donald Trump immediately praised her appointment, calling her fantastic and very talented. did, which is about as subtle as a neon sign in Times Square. Powell McCormick brings deep government ties, deep Wall Street ties, and deep Washington relationships. Now, before government, she spent 16 years at Goldman Sachs, and she recently served on Meta's board. Now, she will focus on expanding Meta's massive data center footprint, building strategic capital partnerships, and scaling the company's long-term investment capacity. Or in other words, she's there to help Meta get big projects approved, financed, and politically protected. This fits into a broader shift happening inside of the company. You see, over the last year, Meta has elevated more Republican-aligned figures into leadership roles. It has scrapped its U.S. fact-checking program. It has ended several diversity initiatives. And it hired a former Trump trade advisor to run its legal team. Now, at the same time, CEO Mark Zuckerberg has been actively seeking political support for Meta's massive AI expansion plans. The company is committed up to $72 billion in capital spending this year alone. That includes new data centers, new infrastructure, and massive energy demands. And those things don't get built without regulatory approval, government cooperation, and political goodwill. Supporters of the move say Meta is being pragmatic. They argue that if the company wants to build at this scale, it needs people who understand how Washington works. Critics say this is about influence. They argue it blurs the line between tech power and political power at a time when Meta already controls enormous amounts of data, communication, and public discourse. And that's where this matters for people watching at home. This isn't just a personnel change. It's a reminder that tech companies don't just innovate, they lobby, they align, and they build political insurance. And when platforms this big start moving closer to political power, it's worth paying attention to who gets access and who doesn't. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, first thoughts on this story. Where do you land on this?
Well, my first thoughts go to what Trump said yesterday to a lot of big tech, which was start paying your own electrical bills, because this comes into the context of Trump really, especially after Mamdani sort of owning the word affordability. You could see Trump realizing that word had traction. So he initially tried to say, oh, that's a scam. But now he's sort of working it all into his talking points because it's really good branding and it's what's on American top of their priority list. So he yesterday released a Truth Social about Microsoft having an announcement, which is likely going to be they're going to own their own power generation. We know Microsoft bought 3 Mile Island, and it looks like they're probably going to get a nuclear reactor going to fund their data center. So in my mind, it's not so much about which projects get approved. I think Trump has to make all of them get the energy sources out there. So I don't think having a Republican versus a Democrat would have made any difference when it comes to that specifically. Now, at the same time, there is still a lot of people, right? And let's not forget that Mark Zuckerberg did have a big effect on the 2020 election. And I believe that, he was Meta even faced a fine for actually manipulating the election with one of their schemes, which was some get out the vote thing. And I believe a court even said that they helped steal the election. I don't have it, I don't have it handy, so I don't want to accuse anyone of stealing an election. But I believe it is categorically true that a U.S. court found them to have influenced the Wisconsin 2020 election through some scheme. You've also got Dustin Moskovitz, right? I think he's the failed Spider-Man who played him in the movie, right? That character, if you're trying to remember the whatever the movie that came out years ago about the rise of Facebook. That fella is still out there, I think, giving about 50 million U.S. trash tokens a year to Democrats. So I don't think there'll ever be a time where Facebook is synonymous with Trump folks and Republican folks. But this definitely does show, there's been a change in Zuckerberg's own worldview as he became an MMA fighter and started hanging out with all of the jiu-jitsu guys. So he definitely changed. This reflects a bit of that, I think. So it's more indeed about tribalism. I don't know if it's really about getting a project approved. I think that would have to happen anyway. I think they have to do the energy. I think Trump wants them off the consumer, let's call it civilian grid for a second. I think he wants them building out grid capacity, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. I don't think that makes a difference. I think everyone gets their approval if they come with plans to build a data center. Just like I said, Trump said that Microsoft would be first out of the gate. I believe he's going to make Amazon do the same. I don't know if we can really consider Jeff Bezos a full-fledged MAGA guy, the way Zuckerberg is
Right.
becoming. He still owns the Washington Post and all that stuff. So
Right.
definitely tribalism, definitely about having a friendly person so the whole company doesn't feel like a Democrat affiliated thing, even if that's not true. I just think that because you have folks like Dustin Moskovitz there, you'll never really get Facebook on one side or the other, and you've got to kind of tip the balance. I think that's what it has a lot to do with. But as far as
Yeah.
specifically the projects, I think everyone gets to build a project because of the need for energy and the appetite that there is for energy. So I think the energy gets done no matter what. But it is about tribalism, really just to have friendly faces. I don't think there's any specific advantage. It's just so that they can't say, well, you're just a Democrat shill. We're not inviting you. At least this way, there is some back and forth. We should always be used to most companies being on both sides of the political aisle. That's in the best interest of most companies to have one foot on either side. I don't think we should hold it against companies to try to hedge their bets on political power. I think it's very normal.
And I got a kind of question about a bigger picture question here about this, Nolan. When companies that literally control information flows also start building this kind of, I don't know, maybe we'll call it political insurance, maybe. How does that kind of change the way that narratives and incentives and even truth itself kind of get shaped going forward? It seems like that could be problematic.
Yeah, well, that's part of the economic and psychological war that really does make up World War III, indeed. You can see everyone complaining right now on Bitcoin Twitter about X's manipulation of the algorithm to not benefit the pools and pockets of Bitcoin or Bitcoiners. You hear a lot of content creators in the Bitcoin world complaining about the algorithm these days. I think the Facebook algorithm has a lot of those complaints. So one could imagine that that's definitely a part of it. I mean, the reality, if you don't leave the Facebook bubble, the Facebook ecosystem, you might think that Facebook is real life, just like people think Twitter is real life, or they think that any one of these
True.
platforms is real life. Usually it's a reflection or some fractal of real life. So I think it's just the typical, you need your media literacy, you need to understand incentives. I don't think we're ever getting out of that world. I think understanding who's pulling the strings, understanding that everyone has their own angle, everyone's trying to nudge you in this way or that way is just par for the course. It is a battle for human attention. If you get the attention, you can direct it somewhere. Once you direct it somewhere, and you have that privileged moment of being able to show them something, that's when you can introduce all kinds of stimulus for fear, for wanting. The truth is we're not rational people. We're learning that more and more. Even in Bitcoin, we are not rational. We make decisions based on what we want and what we're afraid of. And if you can control those things, I saw Glenn Beck had a really great video today about what's going on over at the Fed and the Jerome Powell story. And he had his whiteboard out. And that's what he described it as. He goes, what it comes down to is the Federal Reserve is not accountable to electors. It's not accountable to voters, but it can actually simulate your reality. If you control the money, you can control what people are afraid of, what people want. And if you can control what they want and they're afraid of, there's no use. Whatever raw horsepower you have is irrelevant. The good news in America is that it's so competitive to brainwash people and to try to spin them into your way that they're all doing their best techniques. So
Yeah.
Facebook can try its best, X is trying its best. Everyone's trying their best to persuade you and to make you want something or afraid of something, which will get them to do what they want you to do. That's been going on from the beginning of time. We're just becoming more and more aware of it now that we can see, especially with AI, how it's prompt engineered. And we realize very quickly we can be prompt engineered the same way. It's what I believe, Trump is the greatest human prompt engineer in the world. It's one of his great skills, right? You don't really get to keep your own opinion if you're in a room with Trump, just like the Federal Reserve. He's now caused all these Democrats to be huge Federal Reserve stands. It's hilarious to watch. I don't
Yeah.
think they would have ever picked that up as a policy item a year ago. Yet here they
Yeah.
are, very predictably, very predictably.
Yeah. I don't know what version of the simulation we're in right now, but it's a wild one. So yeah, we'll see. I'm gonna move on to the next story here, Nolan. A lot going on today. All right. So next up, we got a federal judge has temporarily blocked Tennessee regulators from going after the prediction market platform Kalshi. Now, this is a big deal here, folks. You see, Tennessee officials had ordered Kalshi, Polymarket, and Crypto.com to stop offering sports-related event contracts in the state. They also demanded refunds for users and threatened fines of up to $25,000 per violation. Kalshi, well, they sued, and the company argues that it is a federally regulated derivatives exchange under the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, not a gambling platform under state authority. And the judge, well, they agreed. The judge granted Kalshi a preliminary injunction saying Tennessee likely overstepped its authority and said Kalshi would suffer irreparable injury if enforcement continued while the case plays out. For now, Kalshi can keep operating in Tennessee, and this adds to a growing list of court rulings siding with prediction markets in similar disputes, including in Nevada and New Jersey. But not all courts have agreed, and that's why this case matters. You see, prediction markets live in kind of a legal gray zone. They look like betting, but they act like derivatives. And regulators can't agree on which one they really are. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, for someone who's never used a prediction market before, what exactly are these platforms and why are states suddenly trying to shut them down? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, they're betting. I don't think there's any way around seeing them as betting. Yeah, they're betting. Now, I understand technically why they would fall into the derivatives market, but we should be very cautious. I mean, let's not forget the actual history of SBF and FTX came from the gaming of prediction markets. They ran the 2020 election prediction market, which is where the FTX brand name and SBF came from, because in the days after the 2020 election, remember, there were 2 or 3 days where no one really knew who won. It was all political talking heads on television. And what did you end up seeing was the FTX brand name being plastered all over, saying basically the gamblers, the non-sentimental actors, the non-partisan actors, realized, they're all agreeing that Joe Biden won. But not many people were saying, well, wait a minute, SBF is Joe Biden's largest donor. So how can we say that his little prediction market with $1.5 million of order book activity and betting on the books for that market, how can we say that it's even fair? The donation was larger than the entire market for gambling on it. And weirdly, what ended up happening was, so first of all, you got to understand that the CFTC was an invented, due to the financial crisis, regulator. They had no power before 0809. They were kind of put in there to look out for what is gambling in the commodity markets, and they gained a lot of power. They existed before, but they gained a lot of power when the 0809 financial crisis happened because of the credit default swaps and the betting on the stock market, more or less. So weirdly, for a long time, all of these regulators were the first to regulate the Bitcoin futures market back in 2017 at the Chicago board and the CME. But let's go right through. SBF, the end of SBF, really started in September 2022, 2 years after the 2020 election, when all 5 of the CFTC commissioners, 5 commissioners on the board, they had all been named by the Biden administration, which is also not normal. It's supposed to be politically balanced, but majority in favor of the party in power. So it's supposed to be 3-2 Democrat to Republican. SBF, what he got for all his political donations seems to be control of the CFTC at the time. It was already corruptible then. It was already corruptible then because they banned prediction markets in 2020. Who knows why? We still don't know why. But when they banned those prediction markets, they didn't offer an explanation either. Now, what I know is if you have a reason, I would have taken any reason why they banned it. Anything like you said, it's gambling or whatever. They didn't offer any reason. When you don't offer any reason, you don't have to show me why it's corrupt. They're corrupt. If they don't have to explain their decision, there was corruption there. Now, because all 5 of those CFTC commissioners, which were the ones when you heard about SBF having all these meetings, those were his regulators. That's what he got for his prize. In much the same way that Bitcoiners donating all the money to Trump got, Scott Bessent. Like, they had a lot of say in who the Treasury Secretary was. So that's a normal thing to get your say. He just went a little too far with it. Now, exactly that. Now, I'm not accusing the current CFTC of any corruption. I don't know that they're corrupt, but you could see why a state wouldn't want to listen to them. They're a Johnny-come-lately group. They're only really empowered in the financial crisis. They've already shown themselves to be vulnerable to corruption. And if you're saying to me that the sports betting market doesn't have the funds to corrupt the market, well, let's bet on it. Like, you know what I mean? They do that. So, so that's what's going on. And it's just a sign, I think, of the types of corruption you should be aware of in the federal apparatus. I completely get why a state government would want to fight against it. And it does really, I think, go to where I think things are heading post-Trump, post whatever we get over whatever this World War III situation is that you're going to have an acceleration and a reawakening of states' rights. You're going to have a lot of these federal agencies that don't really have a mandate to be there get sort of erased. Now, I don't know. The market structure bill details are going to be all available, I think, in 2 days. I think Thursday is when we're going to have a better look at what exactly is going on in the market structure bill, the one that Paul Atkins and the SEC is talking about. But that's about sharing competency and regulatory power with the CFTC. The big sticky point in that is the stablecoin yield. I think they figured it out, but I bet you we're going to have some clarity, especially on states and federal rights when it comes to the CFTC and their jurisdiction. And I expect there to be some information about the betting markets, the prediction markets, and the gambling infused into the market structure bill on Thursday. If I'm wrong about that, then things just get pushed out further into the states' rights issue. And whether they get, I don't know if Tennessee is going to get its way, but it's just another sign of different individual states waking up. You see it with Minnesota and the federal government. You saw it with Texas and the federal government under Joe Biden. The natural trend we're seeing here is individual states like Florida, California, Texas, Minnesota, and now Tennessee waking up to their own powers and seeing just how far back they can start pushing the federal government. The trend from the Civil War to World War II till now was a growing federal government. I think we're heading in the other direction now, and the states are going to start to claw back some of their sovereignty at the expense of the federal government. And betting markets, I think, are one of the most obvious ones. If a state votes to not have sports gambling, which was completely illegal across the entire continent just 5 years ago for many reasons that we understand, it looks like many people are complaining it's ruining sports as it is. You know, we all remember the Black Sox. We all remember what happened when they had gambling in baseball before. It was not a good look. You know, it's probably not a good look going forward. So we'll find out. But states, I assume, are going to have the rights to do this. So I wouldn't worry too much about Kalshi's reputation and all the things they're defending themselves on. This will come out in market structure, or else it will come out with states' rights reawakening.
Yeah, no, this is an interesting one. I do find some value in kind of the idea of the wisdom of the crowd, and the fact that you have to put money behind it kind of makes me think like, all right, well, people are going to be doing this probably truthfully, but it is ripe for absolute insider information. You know, people in the government who know things are going to happen.
Doing it all the time.
So that's problematic. I do wonder, though, if on Kalshi we can bet as to whether how this is actually going to play out on Kalshi itself. But that's a story for another day, because we're going to take a quick break here, Nolan. Yeah, sorry.
But you're right about the gameability. You're right about the gameability.
Yeah, no, that's a no-brainer there for sure. So, all right, we're going to take a break, guys. When we're back, we're going to be talking about what's happening with Venezuela's Bitcoin stash, all that and more coming up when we return right after this quick break here at RoxomTV News. News. Currently, Bitcoin's price is sitting at around $93,000, and that leads us to our top Bitcoin story of this hour, which comes from SEC Chair Paul Atkins, who says it remains to be seen whether the U.S. will take any action regarding Venezuela's reported $60 billion in Bitcoin holdings. Now, Atkins did not elaborate on what that action might look like, noting that asset seizures are not his focus and fall outside his immediate priorities. Instead, he emphasized that his attention is currently on domestic policy, specifically the market structure clarity bill the Senate is set to take up this week, which he said will set the tone for the rest of the year. Here's more of what he said.
Venezuela has a Bitcoin stash worth about $60 billion. The chair of the SEC, Paul Atkins, joins me now. Mr. Chairman, what's going to happen to those Bitcoins?
Well, that remains to be seen. I think, this whole operation has been amazing. The president and Secretary Rubio, and then the brave service people in our armed forces have done a really spectacular job to try to help bring peace and liberty and prosperity to the people of Venezuela, and then obviously safety to the American people.
Well, are we trying to take those Bitcoin off them?
Well, I mean, that I leave that to others in the administration to deal with. I'm not involved in that. I'm focused really, this week is an important week because the Senate's going to be taking up a bill. It's a bipartisan bill, but which will bring clarity and certainty to the crypto world, and as to the division of responsibility between the SEC and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. So important week, and it'll set the tone for the rest of the year, I think.
Now, it's important to note that there are no direct, fully confirmed reports or on-chain evidence showing that the U.S. government has seized or is currently in possession of a large amount of Venezuelan state-held Bitcoin. Major blockchain intelligence firms have not verified claims that Venezuela actually controls hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin in identifiable wallets. And the widely circulated $60 billion figure remains unverified. So while the number keeps getting repeated, there is currently no transparent, independently confirmed blockchain data to support it. What is clear is that U.S. regulators are focused inward, not outward, and that whatever the truth is about Venezuela's Bitcoin is not yet something Washington is prepared to formally act on. We're bringing Nolan. We got Nolan still? Great. Nolan, first thoughts on this. What do you think? They might have Bitcoin, they might not. The U.S. might take it, they might not. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think this is them not knowing what the hell's going on and just trying to come up with, just trying to kill the clock here. I don't think there's any way that even if they have it, it wasn't looted. It's not like there's this structure of honesty that has been absorbed in the administration. The regime that is still working there is the old regime. I'm sure they're looting anything they can loot right now, and let's be honest, the reason we love Bitcoin is because it's actually easy to steal. In that sense, if you have the keys, you got the coins. So, it's that your keys, your coins aspect that makes it so powerful, but obviously confiscatable if you've got it. There's no legal authority that the U.S. can get by seizing these apparatus, seizing the Venezuelan apparatus that is going to get them the Bitcoin. They're not going to find it in a drawer somewhere, I don't think. If there's any accounting of it, I don't think they're like the Nazis. I don't think they kept great data on everything. That's not really who we're dealing with here. I suspect, as we've heard from Maurizio del Bartolomeo, am I phasing in and out? As we heard from Maurizio from Ledin, as you might hear in the next conversation, there we are. Yeah, he finds it very dubious that money still exists, that Bitcoin is still there. It's all rumors. I mean, we don't even know how much we have in America, truthfully, right? So when are we going to find out about Venezuela? There you go.
Yeah.
And now, if they do find it, I assume they're going to take it. So all the more reason why they're never going to find it.
All right. Well, what do you think the world's reaction would be to the United States not only removing a sitting president like Maduro like they did, but also seizing billions of dollars in Bitcoin? I feel like that might not be the best look. What are your thoughts if that were to actually happen? How do you think that'd play out?
Yeah, I don't think that's the way it would be interpreted. I think that the ingesting of Venezuela is already happening. So the oil is already, what is it? I mean, the amount of barrels of oil that are just American now. So I don't think the world will have much say on this, especially because I anticipate that as America continues to grow, right? America is in a growth stage. This sort of happens every 80 years. There's a cycle of America going through these growth stages. We saw it at the end of World War II. We saw it at the end of the Civil War. We saw it at the end of the Revolutionary War. At the end of World War II, of course, that's where America really built this whole global system where they sort of hid their foreign policy behind the UN and other transnational groups, but they're moving away from that now. So they're moving back to their own sovereignty and away from whatever sovereignty they had lent to international organizations like the UN. And there's becoming a lot more accountability at the local level and a lot more accountability, and sovereignty being expressed. The accountability comes with the sovereignty. So I suspect that there is going to be some way of lining up the sovereign rights of a lot of South American countries so that they align with the United States of America in some kind of a new arrangement. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I think we're all feeling it out. But I believe the Venezuelans will be satisfied with it eventually, because it's an organic thing. It's not even going to be Trump who realizes a lot of this. This is just going to be the state of affairs going forward. We'll find out after the 8 million high IQ Venezuelans come home, start rebuilding there, if they can build a new country, or if it becomes something like an American state or an American proxy state or whatever else, not dissimilar to what we see in Korea and Japan today. They're really American examples of imperialism. They have their own currency, their own sovereignty, but they are not really that sovereign. They have to adhere to mostly what America wants and says. That was the cost of rebuilding them. Let's say when America rebuilt Japan and Korea, they got a tacit inclusion of those countries into the American version of empire, not at all the same version that we've seen of empire before. I suspect whatever version of empire America implements will look a lot like the Japanese situation. Remember, Japan doesn't have the sovereignty that people are talking about either. If they were told their currency is worth twice as much, they were told their currency is worth less, and they just did it and they had to go buy it. The Japanese yen trade is not a bunch of Japanese being clever. That's not what happened. It was organized by Reagan, how they would interact with the Federal Reserve, how it would interact with America. They got a lot of benefit out of it. They got to have a manufacturing base. They got to be a factory for America. Their living standards were great. They were able to do a lot of stuff. Korea, very similar deal, right? They got a very similar deal. You're going to build ships. We're going to give you huge amounts of American money every time you build us the biggest ship port in the world, right? In Ulsan, South Korea. That's where all those huge cargo ships come from. So I believe it'll be a similar deal that we'll get for Venezuela going forward. If they can manage sovereignty in the way that Japan and Korea has it, then that's what they'll get. But I don't think they're going to be, even the oil deal that America has given them. Okay, we're going to sell your oil. We're going to take the money we get from the oil, and you're going to buy our agricultural products. So that's how much sovereignty they have today, which isn't a lot. Now they're going to try and get more, and America will give them sovereignty every time they earn it, let's say. But it's a pet. It's a pet. It's a pet, for lack of a better word.
Well, yeah, we'll see if Venezuela's the new pet. I don't know, but I'll be interested to see how this all plays out. But Nolan, I got to say, my man, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and thank you for sharing your insights and expertise with us. And we'll see you tomorrow, all right?
See you tomorrow, my man.
Sounds good. Enjoy your day. Thanks, bud. Appreciate you. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV New, guys, but when we're back, we're going to be going into our second hour of today's show, including our special guest that'll be joining us in just a bit, so stay tuned. More top news stories coming your way right after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Now, before we get into our second hour of today's program, here's a quick recap of the top stories from the first hour of this morning's show. In Iran, protests have turned into what human rights groups are calling the deadliest crackdown in years, with reports of mass killings, internet shutdowns, and at least one protester now scheduled for execution. And as international pressure rises, the big question is whether the regime holds through force or finally begins to fracture under the weight of its own repression. And in big tech, Meta has named former Trump advisor Dina Powell-McCormick as its new president, a move widely seen as a strategic play to deepen its political influence in Washington. With a $72 billion AI expansion underway, it's a reminder that tech giants don't just innovate anymore, they lobby, align, and build political insurance. Now to the top story of our second hour, and this story is horrifying. Thank you for the stinger, guys. And this next story, gang, is a little horrifying, and it's not exactly complicated. A massive rubbish landslide at a privately run landfill in Cebu City has killed at least 11 people, and more than 20 others are still missing. And over 100 workers were on site when it collapsed. Now, rescue teams have pulled at least 12 injured people from the debris, but officials say the chances of finding more survivors are fading because tons of waste are still burying the area. Authorities say signs of life were detected earlier this week, which is why crews have stayed in full rescue mode despite the grim conditions. The landfill has now been ordered to suspend operations, and the company that runs it, Prime Integrated Waste Solutions Incorporated, has been told to submit a compliance plan within 90 days. Investigators are trying to determine what caused the collapse. Preliminary reports point to weeks of heavy rainfall that added enormous weight to the waste. There are also concerns about possible engineering failures. Now, this disaster has reopened a long-running debate in the Philippines about waste management and worker safety. Lawmakers say similar tragedies have happened before. They say investigations happened, they say promises were made, and then nothing really changed. Senator Amy Marcos summed it up bluntly, saying this should have never happened. She and others are calling for a nationwide review of landfill operations and labor conditions. And this is where this matters for people watching at home. You see, disasters like this don't usually come out of nowhere. They're the result of systems that quietly accept risk, delay reform, and treat workers as replaceable. When safety becomes optional, tragedy eventually becomes inevitable. And one of Australia's most prominent literary festivals has been canceled, and it wasn't because of weather, funding, or ticket sales. It collapsed over a free speech fight. You see, the Adelaide Writers' Week was scheduled to take place in February. Now, it was canceled after the festival board disinvited Palestinian-Australian author Randa Abdel Fattah. Now, the board said the decision was made out of a concern for cultural sensitivity following a mass shooting at a Jewish Hanukkah celebration in Sydney last month. That decision triggered a massive backlash. More than 180 writers boycotted the event, and the festival's director, Louise Adler, resigned. And within days, the entire festival was scrapped. Adler says she stepped down because she cannot be part of what she described as the silencing of a writer. She warned that restrictions on protest, slogans, and speech in the aftermath of the attack were beginning to threaten freedom of expression. Now, Abdel Fattah called the decision blatant censorship and anti-Palestinian racism. She said she had no connection to the attack and rejected the board's apology when it later reversed course. Now, the board ultimately apologized, acknowledged it had deepened divisions, and announced the festival would not go ahead. Now, all remaining board members are now expected to step down, and this has intensified a much broader national debate in Australia. It touches on anti-Semitism, it touches on Islamophobia, and it touches on where the line is between safety, sensitivity, and censorship. Supporters of the board say public events must be careful not to inflame tensions during times of crisis. Critics argue that canceling voices because they are controversial only makes those tensions worse. And this is where this story matters for those of you watching at home. When fear enters cultural spaces, it often arrives disguised as protection. But once decisions start being made based on perceived risk instead of actual wrongdoing, creative freedom becomes fragile. And once that happens, the question becomes, who decides which voices are too dangerous to hear? We're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we'll have our special guest of the day joining us to talk some of our top stories. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Bitcoin price is currently around $93,000, and we want to recap our top Bitcoin story of the first hour before we bring on our first guest of this second hour. Now, this story involves SEC Chair Paul Atkins, who says it remains to be seen whether the U.S. will take any action regarding Venezuela's reported $60 billion in Bitcoin holdings. Atkins did not elaborate on what that action might look like, noting that the asset seizures are not his focus and fall outside his immediate priorities. Instead, he emphasized that his attention is currently on domestic policy, specifically the market structure clarity bill the Senate is set to take up this week, which he said will set the tone for the rest of the year. And it's important to note that there are no direct, fully confirmed reports or on-chain evidence showing that U.S. government has seized or is currently in possession of a large amount of Venezuelan state-held Bitcoin. Major blockchain intelligence firms have not verified claims that Venezuela actually controls hundreds of thousands of BTC in identifiable wallets, and the widely circulated $60 billion figure remains unverified. All right, joining us for the second half of the show to talk this story and others, he's the co-founder and CSO at LED, and please welcome back one of our good friends, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, everybody. Mauricio, welcome back to the show. Great to see you. How are you? Happy Tuesday.
I'm doing great. Happy Tuesday, Happy New Year, and very glad to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. And I want to get right to it. Since we last saw you, Mauricio, a lot in the world has changed. Firstly, we saw President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, seized by the United States in a covert mission. What are your first thoughts on that? I know you have a lot more stake in this game than most with your ties to Venezuela.
Yeah, as some people know, or maybe others don't, I was born and raised in Venezuela. I have a lot of family and friends that are still there. My family started mining back in 2015, late 2014, early 2015, and we found Bitcoin as a lifeline in the middle of a collapsing country, collapsing economy, where, I think the sort of best reference point to the disaster and the pain that Venezuelans have endured over the past 26 years is the fact that over 9 million Venezuelans out of a country of 30 million have fled the country since 2013. That is the largest migration crisis in the continental Americas and one of the largest in absolute terms, really, in the world. That is largely the reason why so many Venezuelans are celebrating Maduro's capture. Many of us don't see him as a president. He's not a legitimate president. He's a dictator. He has not really won, in my view, and many other Venezuelans' view. Any of his elections have been won democratically. He's really just stayed in there through brute force after Chavez died because they were reluctant to hand off power and face justice, because as the recent events show, most of them, or a lot of people in that regime, would, the second they lose their diplomatic immunity, would be sent straight to jail because of the crimes of, the human rights violations they've done, straight out, extrajudicial killings, murdering of innocent protesters, etc. So I think the fact that there is now a glimpse of hope for change to return to a free and democratic Venezuela, imperfect as it may have come about, is a point for celebration, and it's why you're seeing so much excitement in the country. There's still a lot to be done. There's still a lot that needs to be cleaned up before we can say it's been, a transition to democracy has been achieved. But we are, the chances of us getting there are much, much higher today than they were just 10 days ago.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you shared that with us. It's nice to hear somebody who has real ties to Venezuela give their beat on this situation, because it seemed like it was a bit divided when it first happened. I saw lots of videos of people actually in Venezuela seemingly celebrating for the most part, but then there was people picketing and rioting out here in the United States about it. What's the deal with that? Why do you think there's this big fracture? In Venezuela, people seem to be happy, but here in the United States, people are saying this isn't right. What's going on there? What am I missing?
I think what's happening right now is the media coverage on this has created a bit of cognitive dissonance, right? As a Venezuelan, I've been following a lot of the anti-Maduro protests, and as many Venezuelans have been angered by these types of anti-Maduro protests, because many of us, there haven't been any in where I live, so I haven't been able to go and face these myself, but I've seen ample coverage of Venezuelans going to these anti-Maduro marches and asking everyone on the march whether they are Venezuelan. And there's not a single Venezuelan in those marches. Where there's lots of Venezuelans is where you're seeing the celebratory demonstrations in places like Miami, DC, all over the world. If you see the one in Buenos Aires, it looks like a rock concert. It's literally tens of thousands of people screaming and jumping. So I've actually had some FOMO of some of these liberation gatherings, because so many of us have been waiting so long just to chant freedom. But I haven't had one. There hasn't been a big one really here where I'm at. But what I will say is consensus. Listen, if you're a Venezuelan that's outside of Venezuela, you were most likely forced to leave by the Maduro regime. So understand, anybody watching this, that imagine why, if you're a Maduro fan and a Chavista fan and a socialism, communism fan, why would you be out of the country? Isn't utopia right there waiting for you? Like, why did you leave? Yeah. Right. And so most of the people that have left, a lot of us didn't leave by choice. We were forced to leave because our life was being threatened. Our well-being was being threatened. I find it very hard to believe, if not impossible, that the people that went through what I went through, my family's gone through, and my family had it easy compared to others. I didn't lose a relative because there weren't medicines. I didn't lose a relative because he was incarcerated by the regime and tortured to death, which has happened many, many times. So to even try to pretend that there are Venezuelans outside the country happy or protesting against what's happened is I actually think it's disrespectful. And so I would encourage anybody looking at these manifestations against Maduro to ask and try to verify for yourself whether there are in fact any Venezuelans in those demonstrations. But more importantly than that, 9 million of us have left. Most people probably have a friendly Venezuelan on their contact list. Ask them how they feel. And you'll probably hear something very similar to what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear at least that from you, just because when I first heard this story, and I did see that there were people celebrating, then there were people kind of demonstrating against it, I was starting to worry. I'm like, is the United States like now on the wrong side of history? But it sounds like from people who are actually truly affected by this in Venezuela, this seems to be like a turn for the better. So I'm certainly glad to hear that. And then an additional wrinkle to this story that was recently announced that I want to talk about was this $6 billion Bitcoin fortune that Venezuela may or may not have and the US may or may not seize. What do you know about this situation right now? Is this all just a bunch of talk, or is there a realistic chance that Venezuela does have this Bitcoin stash? What have you heard regarding this matter?
Yeah, I took this up into my own hands because I actually was so upset when I started hearing this rumor. Because I mean, again, as somebody that's lived there, witnessed the corruption, witnessed the mismanagement, witnessed the prosecution they did against the industry, people that wanted to do well and build good businesses in Venezuela around Bitcoin and crypto. We were basically prosecuted, witch hunted, and basically kicked out of the country. So I took a very deep dive around these allegations, and I basically put together a set of arguments and evidence that, in my opinion, should prove that Venezuela does not have $60 billion worth of Bitcoin. And I walk through why. I mean, I'm happy to take you through, the report allegations and what I believe are the facts and evidence around each one of those sources of Bitcoin that, in my book, kind of evidence the fact that it's extremely unlikely, not to say impossible, that Venezuela has amassed $60 billion for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. So I mean, I'm happy to walk you through the thesis and the facts and the evidence, but I don't believe they have any material amount of Bitcoin.
I would be curious, because you're pretty much my most trusted source now on this particular story. So you don't have to give me every detail, but yeah, what's kind of the short and skinny that you've unearthed from your own research into this matter?
Yeah, so the allegations are that Venezuela has acquired Bitcoin through three sources. A reported gold swap. They sold gold reserves and swapped it for Bitcoin in 2018, coordinated by a guy called Alex Saab. They also received Bitcoin via payments from oil sales. And they also generated Bitcoin by operating stolen and seized mining equipment from innocent miners. So let me walk you through the three allegations and why I think they're all lies. Number one is this alleged gold swap. Apparently, or according to the allegations, $2.7 billion of Venezuelan gold reserves were sold in 2018. And they allegedly were swapped into Bitcoin at a price of between $3,000 to $10,000 per Bitcoin. And this was all orchestrated by a gentleman called Alex Saab. And Alex Saab is a very important figure in the Chavista Maduro criminal ring or regime. And he's been so for many, many years. Why I don't believe this is true, or Mr. Saab controlled any of this Bitcoin or orchestrated this swap, is because Alex Saab was actually in US custody from 2020 to December 2023. He was released back to the Venezuelan regime by the Biden administration in December 2023. And we are being asked to believe that a person that was supposedly controlling an amount of Bitcoin that, according to the numbers, if you run the numbers and the dates, by the time of his release, he would have been in control of $10 to $20 billion worth of Bitcoin. And we're expected to believe that a person controlling that was, after 3 years in the US custody, was just given back to the regime and handed basically 2 times the amount of money that was held by the central bank. The Venezuelan central bank, at the time of his release, claimed to have $9.9 billion in reserves. So this gentleman that was released from US custody was given back to them with 2 times the assets that the central bank controls. In an unfriendly regime. I find that very hard to believe. For that reason, I don't think the swap is real or there's any Bitcoin there. The other one is Venezuela sold oil for Bitcoin. Yes, this is true. Venezuela sold oil for crypto. In fact, there was the state-owned oil company PDVSA worked very closely with a regulator for crypto that the regime spun up called Sunacrip. They were managing the oil sales between 2020 and 2023. And in 2023, there was a massive corruption scandal that erupted, and which led to the closure of Sunacrip, the crypto regulator, because Corrupt officials within PDVSA and Sunacrypt had been embezzling up to $20 billion privately from through fraudulent sales to the state-owned oil company. So Venezuela has had a history of extreme corruption, and any proceeds in crypto that were received by these oil sales were most likely siphoned to the pockets of corrupt individuals and never made it back to PDVSA, let alone the Venezuelan Central Bank, to be held in reserves. And that's just one case of corruption, totaling 20 billion. There's more. There's Tarek El Aissami. If anybody wants to have fun and go down the Tarek El Aissami rabbit hole, you can Google that name and find out how much more he stole in addition to the 20 billion. But then it brings us to our last point, which is operating stolen mining equipment. I know for a fact they stole mining equipment because some of it was my family's. And I know for a fact they operated it because when they gave us back the equipment 5 years later, it's very visibly operated and non-working condition. They gave us back the aluminum casings of the miners. Why don't I believe that any of that Bitcoin accrued to the state is because many times when those equipments or when that equipment was seized or stolen, it was done so by Maduro's death squads, Maduro's rogue squadrons. And those people were stealing this equipment under the premise that they could then mine it themselves. That was their bounty. That was their payout. This is Maduro allowing them or giving them free reign to steal equipment so that they can get their bonuses, if that makes sense. The intention was never to have that equipment mined to the benefit of the state or to the benefit of the Venezuelan people. So again, any proceeds from you operating stolen mining equipment was siphoned to, as per me, I believe it was siphoned through the pockets of private corrupt death squad officials or generals or members of the army, but never made it back to the Venezuelan reserves. So all this to say, I don't believe Venezuela controls any meaningful amount of Bitcoin for the benefit of its people. There's Bitcoin there, likely in the hands of many, many people, but not in the hands of the government.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that detailed breakdown. That makes a lot of sense. So kind of what I'm hearing is it sounds like a lot of his inner circle probably might have benefited personally, but none of this Bitcoin was mined for Venezuela as a nation. That's kind of seemingly what happened. Yeah, is that accurate? You think?
What you described happened in basically every other vertical. It was never done for the benefit of the people. It was done for the benefit of Maduro and his friends.
Wow. Well, that's some impressive reporting. So thank you for sharing that with us, Mauricio. I was just assuming it was there, but I feel very differently now. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. And we're going to move on to our next story here in just a second. So hang 10, we'll be back at the end of a second. Because first, former New York City Mayor Eric Adams has launched something called the NYC token, claiming it would help fight anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, which is a bold promise for a digital coin that most people had never heard of until right now. Now, Adams pitched it as a community-focused asset that would fund education programs, scholarships, and initiatives against hate, all rooted through a nonprofit that hasn't actually been named yet. And he said it would even partner with historically black colleges and universities. That was the pitch. Then the token collapsed hard. Let's take a look at this graph right now. So this shows that the NYC token fell more than 81% from its peak, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in market value within minutes of launching, which is not usually what people mean when they talk about building a community. Now on launch day, the price surged to about 58 cents, briefly putting its valuation somewhere between 580 to 730 million before liquidity was pulled and the price cratered to roughly 10 cents. On-chain data shows large USDC withdrawals from wallets tied to the project shortly after the peak, which is what triggered the collapse. Now, in crypto terms, this is what people call a rug pull. And no, that is definitely not a compliment. You see, what makes this especially striking is that Adams had previously positioned himself as a Bitcoin-friendly politician. You see, back in May of 2025, he spoke at the Bitcoin 2025 conference in Las Vegas, where he floated the idea of Bitcoin-backed municipal bonds called Bitbonds as a way for New York City to experiment with the future of money. For a brief moment, it sounded like he might actually understand what separates Bitcoin from the Wild West of speculative tokens. This launch suggests that he did not. And this is not an isolated incident. As you might remember, Argentinian President Javier Milei once publicly endorsed a meme token called Libra, which briefly hit a multi-billion-dollar valuation before collapsing more than 90% within hours as insiders cashed out, triggering political backlash and official probes. And of course, Trump coin followed a similar script, spiking fast, collapsing faster, and leaving everyday buyers holding the bag. Now, this is the pattern with personality-driven tokens. They depend on hype, not fundamentals. And they depend on trust in people, not systems. And when that trust breaks, it breaks instantly. And that's why this matters for people watching at home. Bitcoin was built to remove the need to trust personalities. Meme coins, well, they depend on them. And until the public learns the difference, stories like this will keep repeating themselves. We're bringing Mauricio back. Mauricio, when a former mayor launches a token that claims to fight anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, but then collapses within minutes, what should regular people assume first? That it was poorly designed, poorly governed, or poorly intentioned? What do you think?
It pains me to see these news. You know what's anti-American?
Yeah.
Rug pulling people, lying to people,
Yeah.
being dishonest, right? You know what would have been honest? To say, I want money to pursue this initiatives. Here's my charity. Donate to my charity, right? That's honest. That shows integrity.
Yeah.
How many times do we have to see these meme coin rug pulls before people realize that there's just people out there trying to prey on your weakness and your money, right?
Yeah.
They try to sell you this dream, this financial nihilism dream, that you're going to support something and that it's going to go up and it's going to change your stars. All the while, all they were looking for is they're trying to raise funds, right? Why are we doing this? Like, seriously, like why do people still do this? Why do we still, as a community, allow this, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's no reason. What's the investment thesis on that thing? How do you make money off supporting these anti-this, anti-that, anti-this? How? How do you expect to give the people investing in that token value return to them? There's no mechanism.
Right.
And this holds true for many tokens exist today. It doesn't just have to be this mayor's meme token. There's many of them that meet this. And it's upsetting. It's disappointing to see politicians and people that are supposed to be role models doing these things, taking advantage of these things, because that's all they're doing is they're taking advantage of this. Right? He's not the first one.
And, you know,
he won't be the last one. And sometimes people hear Bitcoin or stock and they say, stick to Bitcoin, right? Like, don't mess around with the other stuff just because you don't know what else is out there. You don't know everyone else's intentions. Right. There's no other founderless asset than Bitcoin. Why put your trust in your hard-earned money on the others? And many people think that that's an extremist view, right? It is, but it comes out of a self-preservation, right? Like, if you're a young, impressionable person and you're hearing the ex-mayor of the United States talk about anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, and he's raising money, and that you can make money by supporting him, You've never had a real job. Perhaps you don't even work in finances. Many people go about their lives. They don't know how money works. And it's just extremely disappointing to see this stuff happen time and time and time again. And I think we just need to start holding people accountable, frankly. Like, I think this won't stop until we start holding people accountable.
Yeah, no, I agree. But also part of me kind of feels like this is a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me situation. Like, if you are somebody who is investing into these types of token launches with just a big figurehead who's promoting it, like, at this point, we kind of all should know better. Because like you said, we've seen this time and time again. Political figures, celebrities, they promote these tokens, they pump them, they crash, they leave everyday users holding the bag. So my question is, and you kind of touched on it, why do you think politicians keep choosing speculative tokens instead of something like Bitcoin, which actually removes trust in the personalities? Why do you think that? Just because it won't fill their own bag as quickly? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Because you can't get rich off of that. Because if if you take donations on Bitcoin, you'll just take donations on people on Bitcoin. That donation, when you're asking somebody to make a donation, they think very differently than when you're giving somebody an investment opportunity. Does that make sense? So when you pitch your donation as an investment opportunity, you create this cognitive dissonance around a person who's saying, oh my God, this is an investment that can make me a lot of money. I will almost bet you, not knowing who invested in this token, I would be shocked to find anybody that invested in this token with the true intention of actually most of the money. There will certainly be a few people that those are the weak people whose money is basically sadly gone. But most people participating in this thing, we're just looking to prey on the weak and the ignorant, right? And the sad reality, and this is something that has come true that I've sadly seen to be proven true in Venezuela. The lack of education and the vulnerability of people that don't have a financial background around money and investment is almost a bottomless pit, right? Like you can keep doing these meme coins time and time, and you will continue to find incremental buyers for a significant period of time before it's all called, before somebody calls the end, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, I think, and this is, I know many people don't like me saying this, but this is in many ways where regulation comes from, right? Like you allowed bad actors to take advantage of certain vulnerabilities so many times that eventually you as a government said, this is not good for us. This is not good for our economy. Every time these people come up with these meme tokens, they sunk, billions of dollars out of productive people, and they give it to these gamblers. And what do these people do? I bet you those billions of dollars would have been better kept in the hands of those teachers and those police officers and those firemen, and not given to Eric Adams to basically, I don't know what he's going to do with this money. Frankly, I would want to see some semblances of justice, because the other thing is, if there is no accountability, what example are you setting? Right? Like if we don't hold anyone accountable, what's stopping everyone from using their platform or their brand to rug pull people? They're doing this.
Yeah.
Every so often we get these waves. And so it's just like, oh, that person did it too. Oh, and that person did it too. And then that person did it too. Until we put a stop to it, we're just going to keep seeing more and more people get rugged. And frankly, more and more people burn their reputations and their brands by doing these things.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the gun control problem here in the United States. Until we actually do something concrete, these types of things are going to continue happening, whether we like it or not, until some actual regulations are put in place for this. So it's not a good thing. I don't like it. Not a fan of it, but that's the way the world is right now. But a problem I have with it specifically is this coin was allegedly developed to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism. So they co-opt things that should be good, right? Like, oh, everybody can get behind that. Like, yeah. But then it turns out to be something bad, and those kind of get co-opted by being even associated with something like this, which is never a good thing. But we'll see what happens. I'll be curious how this one plays out. We're going to move on to our next story here, Mauricio, as Russians are calling their government to ask if they can get their pensions paid in crypto. Okay. According to Russia's social fund, questions about crypto have become one of the most common non-standard inquiries on its hotline, which handles tens of millions of calls a year about pensions and social benefits. Now, operators say they now regularly have to explain the same thing. All pensions are paid in rubles. Cryptocurrencies are not an option, and they are not even within the fund's authority. Still, the questions kept on coming, and that tells you something. Now, this reflects how deeply crypto has moved into Russia's financial mainstream. According to Chainalyst data cited in the report, Russia has now overtaken the UK and Germany to become Europe's largest crypto market. Institutional transfers have surged, large crypto transactions are up sharply, and decentralized finance activity has grown significantly. Now, at the policy level, Russia's central bank is starting to acknowledge that reality, even if cautiously. Regulators have proposed letting some non-professional retail investors access certain cryptocurrencies under strict conditions, but pensions and social payments remain firmly tied to the ruble. This is where this story matters for people watching at home. You see, when citizens start asking governments to pay social benefits in something other than the national currency, that is not a tech trend. That is a trust signal. It means that people are no longer confident that their money will hold its value. And once that confidence cracks, it rarely comes back quietly. Bringing Mauricio back. Mauricio, when people start calling their government to ask if their pensions can be paid in crypto, what does that tell you about the trust in their national currency right now?
It tells me a lot more about their capital controls than it does about the national currency. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
These types of dynamics that you're seeing in Russia are very similar to the ones we have in Venezuela, where people are going into crypto, but it's very important to understand why. So why would a Russian be asking, can you pay me my pension in stablecoins, okay, or in crypto?
Right.
Russia, like Venezuela and like many other bad operators, bad hombres, whatever you want to call them, they create a capital control structure whereby the central bank determines how much a dollar is worth, and they price that dollar at a completely arbitrary and very many and entirely fake or divorced from market reality, right? So what will happen is the government will say $1 equals 300 rubles, right? And when you go to the government and say, here's 300 rubles, give me $1, they'll say, you can't buy the dollars. We don't sell them at 300 rubles. So your only way to buy that ruble is through the parallel market, which they like to call the black market. I like to call it the actual market. The black market is the government rate, in my opinion, right? Yeah. But what happens is you as a Russian will go and say, well, I'm going to go buy some dollars in the private markets, the peer-to-peer markets, and somebody will tell you, to buy $1, you got to give us 600 rubles. So that's 2 times the difference of what the government says it's worth. So for you as a Russian, you would like to receive dollars, right? You would like to receive dollars that basically, if you're getting paid 3,000 rubles, right, from your pension, okay, and the government says that a dollar is 300 rubles. You should tell the government, just give me $100. Don't even worry about the rubles. Just give it to me in crypto, right? And this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, double my pension. Does that make sense? Like they're trying to say, well, if you're giving me 3,000 rubles and you're telling me each ruble is $300, if each dollar is 300 rubles and my pension is 3,000 rubles, just give me the $100. Because they can turn around and get those $100 sold in the open market, in crypto, in the peer-to-peer markets, for $6,000. So of course, what people want is to get the true value of their pension in dollars. What happens in these markets is that the government says the dollar's worth 300. But in the private or in the free markets, the dollar trades at 600. So it creates a big gap between what the government says it's worth and what the market says it's worth. So the entire game in these economies becomes, how do I get dollars at the official rate so I can sell them at the free market rate? That is the entire incentive structure of that economy changes away from producing anything of value to magically 2xing government dollars if you get them at the right rate. So of course, every Russian under a pension is saying, Russia, if you're saying the dollars are worth 300 rubles and my pension is 3,000 rubles, give it to me in dollars. You know, love me, right? Like, don't. I love Russia. Just give it to me and not our currency, right? And so people are looking out for their own self-interest, and the capital controls many times guide this behavior. I'll give you another example. Why are large transactions in crypto increasing in Russia? Because they're sanctioned. Because regulated financial services providers cannot service a lot of Russia, if not all of Russia. Why is DeFi rising? Well, Russian oligarchs also need yield and loans, but they can't use regulated, trusted entities. So where do they go? DeFi. No ML, no KYC. Who cares? Right? And so all of these things are linked. Right? They're linked to either sanctions or capital controls. And, you know, again, there will be good actors and there will be bad actors using these technologies in these types of markets. But the behavior comes from the restrictions, the arbitrary restrictions. Does that make sense? So sanctions create arbitrary restrictions for accessing financial services, and then it pushes activity to the unregulated, unsupervised sector, right? That's not a surprise. And again, the capital controls create different incentives for people, create an incentive for you to operate in the parallel market economy, as in, if you're going to send me a remittance, here's the other thing. This is true for Venezuela too. Under the current Russia capital controls regime, same as with Venezuela, let's just use numbers that are very similar. The Venezuelan government says that a dollar is worth 300 bolívares. The Russian government says a dollar is worth 300 rubles, for argument's sakes. In the black markets or in the parallel peer-to-peer markets, a dollar is trading for 600 bolívares or 600 rubles. If I am a foreign person sending aid to someone in Russia, if I send that person a bank wire or Western Union or any sort of regulated financial rail that hits his bank, if I send a dollar, that person gets 300 bolívares or 300 rubles. If I send a stable coin, that person gets 600 bolívares or 600 rubles. Of course, I'm going to send stable coins. Of course, the people on the receiving end are going to ask you to send them stable coins. Of course.
Yeah.
And so this is what drives all of this adoption. We benefit, the crypto industry or crypto ecosystem gets more adoption thanks to government incompetence. Government is our biggest marketing engine.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? My goodness. Well, at least we're getting adoption. I guess we'll take that from Russia. They're a little shady. I never know what to think about them. Last question, Mauricio, and then I'm going to let you go. From your perspective as a lender, how do you kind of separate healthy Bitcoin adoption from adoption that's being driven by desperation or currency collapse, kind of like what we're seeing in Russia? Is that also considered healthy Bitcoin adoption, or would you maybe consider that something different?
So in Venezuela, I'll give you my example. I got into Bitcoin. My family got into Bitcoin out of desperation adoption, right? And we were forced to get into it. We benefited greatly from it, and we dedicated our lives to it. So 100% that all adoption in a big scale, right? Like, there's going to be good actors, there's going to be bad actors. Bitcoin is permissionless, it's open. We cannot stop anyone from accessing or interacting with the Bitcoin network. The thesis is always, though, that there are more good people trapped in bad governments than bad people benefiting from Bitcoin, right? And so on the net, the world is a better place as more Bitcoin adoption comes online, right? A good person in a bad regime will find a Bitcoin and will, through that, find a connection into the free world and an ability to relocate and participate in the productive economy in the free world. A bad actor is still a bad actor, right? Like, a bad actor with Bitcoin, I would argue it's easier to track bad actors with blockchain and Bitcoin. So they don't really stand to gain much. To them, it's a short-sighted trade, right? Because they still don't understand that it's much easier for authorities to track, seize, freeze, and take back assets if they're operating on a blockchain. So I will actually think that this is a really brilliant move on behalf of sort of global authorities, in the sense that they've sort of made bad actors believe that by using this technology, they can somehow benefit from, bypassing sanctions or doing this or doing that. Where the reality is, the most regulators are probably just drawing a map and tagging a lot of bad wallets, and you're seeing it all the time. Just, I think this week they froze $180 million worth of Tether wallets. They haven't revealed yet who those wallets belong to. I bet you it's not a nice person, right? And so this is going to continue happening. And again, if Russia starts adopting Bitcoin, right, and thousands of people start getting remittances in hundreds of dollars, $200, you're helping thousands of people. And those transactions are irrelevant on the chain, right? Like, who cares that someone's getting $300, $400? Is that person going to finance a terrorist attack? Probably not. But then, if bad actors don't operate in small amounts. So when you're starting, the one thing that out of everything you said is this whole big ticket transactions are increasing in Russia. I'd be closely looking at those tickets, because you're certainly not sending your relative $10 million in remittance help on a monthly, right? So that's probably a transaction payment. That's probably financing for something. So, but again, how amazing is it, Hank, that you can look at the data and say millions of dollars are going into Russia? How do you know? The chain, the IPs. That could have been happening in cash or gold. None of us would have known,
Yeah.
Now we can all sit here and discuss, look at how much has gone in. Look at the wallets. Where's the IP? Narrow it down to the city. Narrow it down to the house. That house received $10 million. Right? Like it is something that long term has a much bigger benefit. The risk return for an innocent good person, the return is massive. Whereas for a bad actor, you can get a temporary return, but you're creating a massive on-chain liability for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I guess in terms of healthy Bitcoin adoption, anytime Bitcoin is solving a real problem in the monetary system, which we're seeing, that's probably healthy adoption. But to your point, there's always going to be bad actors in any space. And at least this way, as we continue to go on Bitcoin's journey, people are going to be a lot more easier to trace these illegal or illicit transactions through Russia or what have you. So yeah, I think overall it's definitely a win for the Bitcoin community. And it's always a win having you here, Mauricio. So I got to thank you so much for your time and expertise today. It was so good, especially getting to hear about your take on Venezuela. I really appreciate you going in depth with us about that, because I know myself and a lot of people are out there are wondering what really is the truth in terms of what's going on and how that whole Maduro thing is being received. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you for your time today, my friend. It's always a blast having you on the show.
My pleasure. See you next time, man.
See you next time, Mauricio. Thank you. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News. We'll be right back after this. Stay tuned. News. With me is one of our other great hosts here at Roxom TV, Walker America. Walker, how are you? Happy Tuesday. What's going on in your show this afternoon?
Well, Hank, always good to be back here, and we've been kicking off our dual broadcasts here, starting with last week. Excited for that to continue this week, but for my show here today, which is every Tuesday from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I've got a pretty interesting show. There's some interesting news, there's some good news, there's some sad news, there's some bad news. We're going to be covering everything from the current currency collapse in Iran and the ongoing protests there, to the former New York City Mayor, Eric Adams, and his rather unfortunate rug pull incident, what appears to be a pretty classic rug pull. Very tragically, Scott Adams passed away, which is really, I think everybody kind of saw this coming for a while. He was very vocal about that, but still it doesn't make that any any easier. But what an impressive guy, and quite a legacy he's leaving behind as well. And then we'll be joined by Zach Shapiro from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and also Nathan from BTC Mentor of BTC Sessions, to go over some of the other stuff that's happening on the legislative side with Bitcoin as it relates to Senator Lummis's new bills that she's introduced, some of these market structure bills. So we've got a jam-packed show. We'll be broadcasting for the next 3 hours. And how was your show today? I just caught the end with Mauricio. He's always a fantastic guest. Love his perspective.
Yeah, he's great. No, really fun time today. Nolan always brings the heat with all the top news stories. So we jammed about Iran. We jammed about, Venezuela. We talked a lot about with Mauricio, which is great, given he's a native Venezuelan. So it was really nice to hear someone who's really has real ties to Venezuela actually talk about the situation, because you remember when the Maduro news came out, as him and I spoke about, we saw protests in the street, but then everyone in Venezuela seemed thrilled. So it was nice to really get it from the horse's mouth, or whatever that phrase is. So really fun show today. Always a jam having Mauricio and Nolan on. And for those of you watching at home, I would definitely recommend you stay tuned with Walker here. It sounds like you got a slamming agenda for today's show and some great guests. So should be a fun couple hours for sure.
Thanks very much, Hank. Excited for our shows later this week as well.
Can't wait. I'll see you Thursday, buddy. Enjoy your show, and everybody stay tuned for Walker America's show. It's starting right now. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you all tomorrow.